Hello, BookTube. Welcome back to my 2025 library tour. In this episode, more classics, canonical, modern, and contemporary fiction, poetry, and drama. This episode begins with Mysterious Skin by Scott Heim. This is a novel from the mid 1990s about two young men who were, as children, sexually abused by their Little League coach. One of the young men becomes a male prostitute, and the other comes to believe that his abuse was actually an alien abduction. To eventually, the two young men come together and work out what happened to them. I read this novel back in the early 2000s when I was in high school, and at the time, it certainly had an effect on me. But coming back to it about 20 or so years later, in 2020 or 2021, I definitely noticed that this was very much a debut work of fiction. The style was very, very rough, and I did not like it in any way as much as didn't have the impact that it had all those years ago, which is something that I'm seeing a lot of. Many of the novels that I read as a teenager or in my early 20s, when I have come back to it in the last few years, I had not as pleasant reading experiences with them. So, yeah. But if I ever did end up parting with this book from my collection, it would have to go into the trash because I did actually bleed on it once. Back in my late teens and early 20s, I got really bad hay fever, and the results usually ended up with me having copious amounts of nosebleeds, and during one of those, I ended up bleeding on this book. So, if it ever left, it would have to go into the trash. Next is The Histories by Herodotus. I've had this for a few years, although I've never gotten around to reading it. Sticking with the classics, next is Hesiod, translated by Richard Lattimore. This is a collection that includes the Theogony, Works and Days, and the Shield of Heracles. I'm really fond of the Theogony. It is one of my favorite poems. I come to it periodically. The next few books are slim volumes of poetry. First up, Tongues of Fire by Sean Hewitt. This came out a few years ago and is a really powerful short collection. I quite enjoy it. I've read it a few times, and every time it works for me. Sorry about the delay, but the books on this shelf are rather packed, and it's a struggle getting them out and back in. So the next two collections are by Tony Hoagland. Donkey Gospel, which is the first collection of his that I've read, and I rather liked it. I'm not as fond of another collection of his, Unincorporated Persons in the Late Honda Dynasty. Um, and I first encountered Tony Hoagland through the Autumn House Anthology of Contemporary American Poetry, in case you're interested. Next is The Jaguar by Sarah Holland Batt. This is from the University of Queensland Press, and I picked it up from Blackwell's, the UK bookstore. Every year here on BookTube in April, there is a BookTube event called Aussie April. And I've been wanting to participate in Aussie April for a number of years, and I just never really have the options for reading Australian literature. There's also another Australian reading event in, is it August or September, that hasn't caught on as well as Aussie April has. So I picked this up for last Aussie April from Blackwell's and really enjoyed it. I quite like this collection. There is, so this is the Australian edition, which Blackwell's had. There was one that came out a bit like a UK edition, I think from Blood Axe, like later in 2024. That similar cover, but I think it has a bit more of the Jaguar. But really like this collection. Next is Danger from the Dates by Andrew Holleran. This is a classic of gay fiction. It's from the 1970s. It's set in the 70s. It's about a man named Malone who comes to understand that he's gay, and he begins to explore the gay night scene and sort of the gay subculture in 1970s New York, and ultimately results in his death at the end of the novel, as unfortunately a lot of gay fiction in the 60s and 70s ended. Thankfully that's no longer the case, although there's still quite a taste for rather depressing gay fiction, as of course a lot of literary fiction is. So anyway, I read it when I was in high school and rather liked it, but my a recent reread attempt last year or the year before was not so successful. So the next few books are by Alan Hollinghurst. I have all of Hollinghurst except for his latest, Our Evenings. I don't know if I'm going to pick it up hardcover or wait for the trade paperback. Given the fact that I am doing a Hollinghurst project this year, maybe I should go ahead and pick it up now. But I'll wait and see if there's any updates on when a paperback release might be forthcoming. Anyway, so this is Alan Hollinghurst's first novel, The Swimming Pool Library. It's set in the very early 1980s, before the AIDS crisis begins, and it's about a wealthy young man who has nothing better to do with his time outside of going to the gym and having copious amounts of sex. One day while cruising, he saves the life of an older elderly gay aristocrat. And this forms the beginnings of something like a friendship between the two of them. The aristocrat asks our protagonist to write a biography of him, and as part of the research for this biography, the aristocrat takes the main character under his wing and kind of teaches him 20th century gay history from the very early years of the 20th century through to the 50s and 60s when homosexuality was eventually decriminalized in the UK. The novel ultimately ends on several betrayals. There is an ulterior motive in the aristocrat's sort of decision to take our main character under his wing, and also the best friend of the main character falls in love with an undercover police officer who arrests him for something. The more I've never quite understood that part of the story. I'm planning on having a go at this novel, obviously because I have a bookmark here, in a few days. So hopefully I'll be able to have an opportunity to talk a bit about this more. Whether I manage to complete the novel for a reread or if I end up bailing on it, because every time I read this book, it's either I finish it or I bail on it. I do not understand why, but it is. Hollinghurst's second novel is The Folding Star, which was a finalist for the 1994 Booker Prize. So this novel is set in... I'm not entirely sure when it's set, but it's mostly set in Belgium. The main character is a teacher who moves to Belgium to take on private students, and he falls in love with one of his students, although he also has a number of other relationships throughout the novel as well. And there's a lot about art. There's this particular artist that haunts the novel. I've never really successfully read this book. I've bailed on it twice. The first time I made it 1 or 2 chapters in. More recently, I managed to get a fair amount of the way through the book before I lost it. So hopefully this next round of my last dance with Alan Hollinghurst, I'll be a bit more successful, but I will report back. Hollinghurst's third novel is The Spell, which is about a gay civil servant who somehow gets involved with his ex-boyfriend and his new partner who's an architect. So the main character is a civil servant. His ex-boyfriend is now dating an architect whose late teenage, early 20s son gets involved with the main character for at least a good chunk of the book. And they go on a number of excursions and stuff. It's been a long time since I've read the book. This is the oldest of the Hollinghurst novels in my collection. I've had this one the longest. I bailed on it when I was in high school, managed to read it in college, and then when I came back to it after a very long time, didn't quite get on with it. So hopefully this year will be the year that I finally reread it. The fourth Hollinghurst novel and the winner of the 2004 Booker Prize is The Line of Beauty. This is a novel set in the 80s. It's about a young gay man who is kind of sort of unofficially adopted into an upper class political family, initially as a friend of the son of the family, of which our main character has something of a crush on, if I remember correctly. However, he eventually is settled on to be the primary caregiver to the daughter in the family, who has some issues. And he's involved with this family until a scandal kind of ruins everything. I've had this novel for quite a while. However, I never got around to reading it until, or attempting to read it, I should say, until a year or two ago when I wanted to read all of Hollinghurst's novels. And to not get on with it all that well, hopefully with this new project, I'll be more successful. I will report back. The fifth novel of Alan Hollinghurst is The Stranger's Child, which I don't know much about because I've never really gotten around to attempting this one. The sixth Hollinghurst novel is The Sparsholt Affair, which I just damaged. This is a novel told in a number of different time periods. It begins with our cast of characters in college in the 50s or 60s, and it follows them throughout their lives as several of the characters fall in love with each other, with their sons, so on and so forth. Did not have much success with this novel when I first tried it. Hopefully, I will manage it this time around. Next up is the Iliad by Homer. So this is one of the foundational epics of the world. It's a story set in the final year of the Trojan War. It's about the rage of Achilles and the ultimate death of Hector. I've read this a few times and quite enjoyed it, although my interest is largely in the part of the story that covers the gods rather than the mortals. I also have the Odyssey, which is the sequel to the Iliad, and this is the story of Odysseus' 10-year journey home. Back to poetry with A Far District by Ishii Hutchinson. This is his debut collection, which was just recently published in the US. Not terribly fond of it. I will come back to it, but my first reading was not super positive. I have a bit of poetry, drama here with 4 plays by William Ing, which includes Come Back Little Sheba, which I read last year, and it's okay. Picnic busts up in the dark at the top of the stairs. For a while, I've been having a strong desire to engage in mid and early 20th century American drama, and this collection was one of the first ones I picked up. for that purpose. Although it wasn't picked up with the others in a big haul. Okay. Next up is A Brief History of Seven Killings by Marlon James, for which he won the Booker Prize. So this is a historical novel set in Jamaica in the late 1970s. Have never really successfully gotten on with this novel. I've tried it twice. I picked up this edition for my ill-fated 10 Contemporary Classics I Must Bell Redeem, which failed miserably. Next is Swimming in the Dark by Tomasz Jadrowski. This is set during the waning years of communist Poland and is about two young men who fall in love, one of whom eventually leaves Poland for a life in the United States, and the other becomes a high-ranking member of the Communist Party. Was not terribly fond of it. This is the selected poetry of Robinson Jeffers. Robinson Jeffers has been one of my favorite poets. I first encountered his work doing a project while I was in college, and many of his poems were very moving. Although, in trying to read this selected edition of his poetry, I haven't had much success. But hopefully I will correct that this year. This is On the Royal Road by Elfriede Jelinek, translated by Jutta Honegger. I think this is a play reacting to the election of Donald Trump in the United States as president. Have not gotten around to it yet. Next is The Unfinished by Reinhard Yergel, translated by Ian Galbraith. Both of these two books are from Siegel, which is distributed here in the United States by University of Chicago Press. I don't recall what this is about. I think it's a historical novel set in part in the German-speaking or formerly German-speaking parts of the Czech Republic. I got both of these books last year from the major sale catalog that the University of Chicago Press puts out every year. I think to make things easier for myself, Metabolics by Jessica E. Johnson will just be hanging out as a Transwise book. So this is a poetry collection that I picked up last year. It was published by Acre, which is affiliated with the University of Cincinnati, who has a distribution agreement with the University of Chicago Press. I think I quite like this collection, although I had some trouble with it, if memory serves me correctly. Next is Gods and Mortals by Sarah Iles Johnson. This is a retelling of Greek mythology, and it is awesome. I really enjoyed this book when I read it 2 years ago. It was phenomenal. Out from Princeton University Press. And features spot illustrations by Johnston's son. See if I can find one. So there's Bellerophon taking on the Chimera. So the next batch of books are slim volumes of poetry. Mostly Troy Jolomar. I have 3 of his collections from the Contemporary Poets series from Princeton, at Lake Scugog, which is quite good. I really like Troy Jolomar's work. Syllabus of Errors. And his most recent, Earthly Delights. I also have Ellipses by Fede Judah, which came out earlier, sometime last year, and was shortlisted for the National Book Award in Poetry. I really enjoyed this collection. It is amazing. This is The Seven Moons of Mali Almeida by Shihan Talaka. It won the Booker Prize in 2022. This is a novel set in Sri Lanka during the 1990s. It's about a gay photographer who is murdered, and his ghost has to figure out what happened to him before he passes on to the afterlife and make sure that his loved ones, both his boyfriend and his best friend, are protected from whatever it was that killed him. I liked the novel. It's okay. I didn't necessarily love it. The next 2 books, or the final 2 books on the shelf, are by Yasunari Kawabata. First up is The Sound of the Mountain. This is a novel about an aging businessman who begins to feel a bit more than father-in-law affection for his daughter-in-law, whose husband, his son, is, I think, having an affair or something. It's been a while since I read this. I also have The Old Capital by Yasunari Kawabata. I got most of my Kawabata collection outside of Thousand Cranes from a professor shortly before I graduated college. So, it's been a while since I read this one. So, the next episode of this tour, whether I do it tomorrow or wait till Monday, is going to begin with Kawabata. So anyway, BookTube, that's it for this episode of my 2025 library tour. I will be back later this evening with a weekly read special, which I'll obviously talk about then. And I'm going to try to do a tag video here in a bit before I go and start baking some chicken. So until then, BookTube, thank you, have a great afternoon, and stay safe.